Hey guys, welcome back to Fragments of Faith. So, this episode is like we normally post on Tuesdays. It's Wednesday right now. And by the time you listen to this, it will be at least Thursday. And the reason we didn't record on time is because what was supposed to be a normal recording turned into me pretty much spiraling about the phrase, everything happens for a reason. And we ended up talking for like an hour and a half. And what was supposed to be a quick conversation turned into this. So thank you guys for being patient with us.
Yeah, today we want to share some of that conversation with you to bring you into it because sometimes we have these off camera conversations. And that because that's how the podcast started. That's what we want to do today. We want to kind of share some of that conversation from the other night with you guys.
Yeah, about a sentence that sounds comforting, but I don't know that I find it that reassuring. Everything happens for a reason. It's one of those phrases that gets said a lot. And I've had it said to me more than once, usually with good intentions. I'm pretty sure almost all the times we're with good intentions because I don't think people mean any harm when they say it. I think it's just what people reach for when they don't know what else to say. But the older I get, the more I've lived through, the more I struggle with it. Because if everything happens for a reason, that's not a sweet, helpful sentence. Like, that's a theological claim. That's a statement about who God is, about control, about suffering, about loss, about what was allowed to happen, about what was prevented and what wasn't. And when you've endured things that you never wanted to endure, when you've sat in despair because things did not end the way that you prayed, when you've watched doors close that you begged God to hold open, everything happens for a reason just stops sounding supportive. It starts sounding like an explanation that I am expected to accept. Because if everything happens for a reason, then what was the reason for it? There are moments in life that don't feel like lessons. They feel like your life just gets split into a before and an after. And when someone says that phrase, that does not help me. It feels like trying to shrink something that was really massive. And I think that's what's so hard for me. If I say I believe everything happens for a reason, am I saying God wrote it that way? Am I saying he designed it that way? Am I saying the devastation was necessary? Because for me, that's not a hypothetical question. That's personal. I actually want to know if everything happens for a reason, then you lose me. I'm not tracking. I don't follow. That does not make sense to me. So when I hear that phrase now, I don't feel comfort. I feel the weight of everything that implies. So let me turn it over to you. Do you actually believe that? Like really believe that everything happens for a reason?
So the other night when this conversation started, I think you were bracing yourself for me to say, "Yeah, I do."
It was.
Um, but I didn't because I don't believe everything happens for a reason in the way that phrase usually gets used. And I think that's where the tension really begins. Uh, most people mean one of two things when they say it. Either they mean God directly caused this, or they mean God needed this to happen in order to accomplish something better. And I don't think either of those is always true. Scripture doesn't teach that every tragedy is individually engineered by God. It does teach that nothing falls outside of his knowledge. And that is a very different claim. There's a difference between saying God caused this and saying God is not absent from this. Those are not the same thing. So when people say everything happens for a reason, um, I really don't think it's for the person they're saying it to. I think it's for them. I think they're trying to rescue meaning from chaos. I think they want to protect God's sovereignty. They want to keep the world from feeling random. And I understand that instinct. We all want to believe that there's a thread running through the darkness, but sometimes that phrase, what that phrase actually does is flatten grief. Because if you tell a grieving parent this happened for a reason, what they're going to hear is God needed this. And that's not something I'm willing to say. I do believe God is sovereign, deeply. But sovereignty doesn't mean micromanagement. It doesn't mean he scripts evil like an author writing plot twists. It means he's not surprised by it and he's not defeated by it. There's a verse in Genesis chapter 50 when Joseph is speaking to his brothers and he says, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." And that sounds a lot like everything happens for a reason. But notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say the betrayal wasn't evil. He doesn't say God made his brother sell him. He doesn't pretend that the pit wasn't a pit or the prison wasn't a prison. He names their intent as evil, fully, without softening it. And then he names God's intent as redemptive. Two intentions existed at the same time. Human evil was real, and God's redemptive purpose was also real. And that's different from everything happens for a reason. That's saying God can weave good through things that he did not author. He can bring life out of what was meant for harm. He can redeem without having to be the architect of the wound. And for me, that's where my faith rests. Not that every loss is necessary, not that every tragedy is divinely designed, but that no loss is beyond redemption. And redemption doesn't always look like reversal. Sometimes it looks like presence that doesn't leave. Sometimes it looks like strength that you didn't know you could carry. Sometimes it looks like compassion growing in places that used to be closed. And sometimes it looks like surviving something that should have destroyed you. But I won't say your loss happened because God needed it. That feels like too small a view of God, as if he requires devastation to accomplish his will. And it places too heavy a burden on the one who is already crushed. So no, I don't believe everything happens for a reason. I believe that God can bring reason into things that never should have happened.
Okay, I hear the distinction you're making, and I know it matters to you. God caused this is different than God isn't absent from this. Like I get that. But here's where it still doesn't sit right with me. Because even if we say God didn't cause it, if he could have stopped it and didn't, and then later bring something meaningful out of it, we still end up in the same place. We still end up saying there was something about that that fit inside the plan. And I don't know what to do with that because when people say everything happens for a reason, what they usually mean is that this wasn't random or it wasn't pointless. It served something. It strengthened you or it shaped you. It brought someone closer to God or it advanced something. But here's a part that I don't know how to reconcile. If my loss becomes useful, does that not then mean it was necessary? because I don't want it to be necessary. I don't care if something beautiful grows out of it. I don't care if it deepens my faith. I know it's selfish, but I don't care if it helps someone else. I don't care if it makes for a really powerful testimony. I wanted my children alive. So when we say everything happens for a reason, even in a softened, PC sort of careful way, it can still sound like suffering was part of a larger good. And I don't know how to call something good when it required that cost.
Yeah, I don't think your tension is actually about logic. I think it's about moral trust because I what I hear you asking is really if God had the power to stop it and didn't, can he still be called good? That's the nerve. And I'm not going to dodge that. There's a difference between something being folded into a larger story and something being justified by a story. Okay, history is full of moments that were absorbed into a bigger narrative without being excused by it. The cross is the clearest example. God didn't prevent it, he didn't override it, he entered it. And the resurrection didn't justify the crucifixion, it exposed it. It didn't say, well, that needed to happen. It said, even that can't win. And that's a different claim. You're worried that if something meaningful emerges later, then the suffering becomes retroactively necessary. I don't believe that. I believe God can take something he hates and refuse to let it have the last word. That doesn't make the thing good. It makes God relentless. Now, here's where this gets uncomfortable. If we define goodness as prevented my loss, then yeah, any loss is going to feel like moral failure on God's part. But scripture never defines God's goodness by prevention. It defines it by presence, by covenant, by ultimate restoration. And you said something that matters. I wanted the original thing. Of course you did. Of course you still do. Faith doesn't require you to prefer the redemptive outcome over what you lost. But it does eventually ask a question that we brought up in a previous episode. Is God only trustworthy if he edits reality the way we would? Because if that's the metric, none of us would survive the first unprevented tragedy. You're not wrong to feel the tension, but I don't think the existence of that tension means the suffering was justified. It means we live in a world where real freedom and real brokenness coexist under a God who refuses to abandon either the world or us to it. And I know you feel abandoned. But anger is not the same as absence. You're not indifferent. You're not apathetic. You're furious.
Yeah.
And fury is still a form of engagement. The question isn't whether the loss was part of a greater good. The question is whether God's character is big enough to be trusted when the greater good doesn't look like what we wanted. And that's not an easy answer. But it's the only one I know how to stand on.
Okay. I appreciate that you're not trying to justify it. I really do. And I get what you're saying about the cross, that the resurrection didn't suddenly make the crucifixion okay. I mean, it didn't erase the fact that Jesus suffered. It didn't make it go away. I mean, he did carry scars afterwards. But here's where I'm still kind of stuck. When you said if we define goodness as God prevented my loss, we're going to be disappointed. I think that's a little bit extreme. That's not actually what I'm saying because I don't I don't actually expect God to put a stopper in death. Like that's not realistic. Nature has death. The Bible says there's a time to live and a time to die. I understand that. I don't expect no one to ever suffer. I don't expect no one to ever die. Maybe I need to say it differently. When I say I struggle with children suffering, I'm not saying children are more worthy than anyone else. I mean, there are people who endure violence, people who are exploited, have families who lose everything, people who die slowly from illness. Like I'm not blind to that. So maybe it's not about one group being protected over another. Maybe it's about the fact that not all losses are equal. And I don't think we do anyone any favors by pretending that they are. Losing a grandparent who lived a long, full life, yes, that is real grief, but it's not the same as losing a child. Losing a sibling isn't the same as losing a spouse. And none of that is the same as a life that was nothing but pain from start to finish. There's a difference between a life completed and a life interrupted. There's a difference between sorrow and complete devastation. And when we say God is good in all of it the exact same way, that's where I kind of resist that a little bit because I don't expect God to prevent all loss. But I don't know how to sit with the idea that all loss carries the same weight either. Some suffering feels excessive. I mean, not just sad, not just hard, excessive. And when you say God's goodness isn't about stopping things from happening, but about being with us in them, yeah, okay, I understand that distinction, but I that's not really where my heart's landing here. Because being in the hospital room with me is not the same as healing my child. Sitting with me in the ashes is not the same as keeping the fire from starting in the first place. So, yeah, presence matters, but intervention matters too. And if you have the power to intervene, that's where my brain and my heart start fighting each other because if God can raise the dead, if he can calm storms, if he can move mountains, then not stepping in kind of still feels like a choice. I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying that because that's the breaking point for me. It's not that I need God to control everything the same way that I would. It's just that when everything broke and he could have stopped it and didn't, presence definitely feels smaller than what I needed. Not that I've walked away. I mean, not that I think God is cruel. I definitely don't have it all figured out. Just that I don't know how to call that good yet because this isn't a theory for me. This is two empty bedrooms. And I don't want redemption to feel like a consolation prize for something that never should have been lost.
I hear you, and I'm not gonna dodge the word excessive. Some some suffering feels that way. It doesn't feel measured, it doesn't feel balanced. It feels like something snapped in the scale and all the weight landed on one side. And you're right, not all loss is the same. We don't have to pretend that they carry equal gravity. A life that runs its course is different than a life interrupted. That's just honest, and I'm not trying to blur those lines, but I wanna slow down one thing. When you say presence feels smaller than intervention, that makes sense. If I can stop something terrible and I don't, then standing next to you afterward doesn't feel impressive. It feels late. I understand that. But I think what you're really circling isn't size, it's choice. And you mentioned it, this idea that if God had the power and he didn't use it, then that says something about his posture toward you. That was a choice toward your kids, toward the hospital room. And when you're standing in the aftermath, that conclusion feels obvious, but it's still a conclusion. And I hesitate there, not because I want to protect God from scrutiny, but because I don't think the jump from he didn't stop it to he chose against me is as airtight as it feels when you're inside the loss. You're not asking for immortality on demand. You're not asking for a bubble wrapped universe. You're saying something feel like they cross the line. And I get that instinct. People see me with my daughter, the wheelchair, the feeding pump, the monitor alarms going off in the middle of church, the suction machine on the back pew, the cough assist, the breathing support, the extra bags we have to carry everywhere, the fact that even leaving the house feels like packing for a small expedition. And they say all the time, I don't know how you do it. Or I couldn't do what you do. For them, it's too much. For them, the line is already crossed. But I don't wake up every morning thinking, man, this is excessive. I wake up thinking, this is my daughter. And I know you know because of the conversations we've had, I'm not comparing burdens. I'm not equating your loss with my situation. I would never do that. But I'm saying that the category of too much is human. It's emotional. It's deeply real, but it's still drawn from inside our limited view. If we decide God is only good when he intervenes the way we would have in that specific moment, then we've made our threshold the standard. We're saying if I had the power, I would have stopped this. So a good God would have too. And I I don't sit over here as the pastor and tell you, these things. I feel that instinct too. I do. There are moments I've prayed for reversal. There are moments I've asked God to change the story. There are nights I've stood over my daughter's bed, listening to machines, force her to breathe, and thought, "You can fix this right now. Right now, you can fix this." And that thought isn't theoretical for me. But here's where I land, and I don't land here casually. My limited perspective on a single chapter cannot be the measuring stick for ultimate goodness. Because if it is, then every irreversible loss becomes evidence against God. And that would mean faith only survives in the life of the spared. And that can't be the measure. You're asking why this wasn't stopped. Why this room? Why this hospital? Why these 2 bedrooms? That's not dramatic. It's concrete. And I don't have an answer that satisfies the math of that. I don't have a formula that makes it feel fair. What I do know is this. If God stepped in selectively every time something crossed our personal line of unbearable, the structure of reality would be unstable. Nature, biology, human will, all, all of it would have to be interrupted and rewritten constantly. And then we'd ask different questions. Why did he stop that, but not this? Why them, but not me? Why today, but not yesterday? The moment we demand targeted intervention, we're stepping to a system that would never feel fair either. That doesn't make your grief smaller. It just means that the alternative is not as clean as it sounds. You said something important. You said you don't know how to call that good yet. And I respect that. But I don't think goodness is proven or disproven by whether intervention happened in this specific case. If it is, then every person who experiences irreversible loss eventually has to conclude that God failed them. That would mean faith, again, only survives in those who are spared. You also said presence isn't the same as healing, and I won't argue that either, because you're right, it's not. But the Christian claim has never been that God guarantees healing in every moment. It's that death doesn't get permanent authority. And I know that can sound distant when what you want is what you lost. But if death is not final, if restoration is not metaphorical but actual, then intervention now is not the only category of goodness available. You don't have to call it good yet. But I don't think your inability to call it good now proves that it isn't. It proves you're standing in something that hasn't been resolved. And that's honest. You said you don't want redemption to feel like a consolation prize. I don't think it is. But I also won't pretend it replaces what you lost. It doesn't replace, it restores differently. And that difference is what you're wrestling with. I can't shrink that for you. But I also can't redefine God's character around a moment, even one this devastating.
So there is a lot in what you just said that I actually agree with. Surprising, I know. But I'm not trying to jump from he didn't stop it to he chose against me. Like, I'm not sitting here thinking God looked at my kids and was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. When I use the word excessive, I'm not talking about my burden. I mean, people used to tell me the same thing they say to you. I don't know how you do it. I couldn't do what you do. But you love your kid, you show up, you figure it out. I mean, I don't think that's heroic. I think that's parenting. But what felt excessive wasn't taking care of them. What felt excessive was what they endured. I wasn't thinking this is too much for me. I was thinking this is too much for them. That's the part I can't reconcile because I don't understand this. I don't know how this fits. I don't know how to call this good without declaring that God failed. And maybe that's what this really comes down to. You can say death doesn't have permanent authority. And I do believe that in theory. But when the loss is here and now and irreversible in this lifetime, that future restoration doesn't feel like the same category as intervention would have been. So again, I don't know how to call that good yet.
You don't have to call that good yet. And I'm not asking you to force those words out of your mouth. I'm saying your inability to say it right now doesn't settle the question. It means you're still standing inside the loss. And sometimes the only honest thing faith can do is stand there without pretending the weight isn't real. Just stand there and refuse to define God's character by the most painful moment we've ever lived through.
Maybe the problem isn't God. Maybe the problem is just that sentence. Everything happens for a reason. I think that's too small for real suffering. Like it smooths things over. It sounds comforting until you've lived through something that does not fit inside that. If what's really being said is God isn't absent, God can redeem, God isn't defeated, just say that. Because some losses don't need explaining, they just need space.
I I think that's fair. Maybe the sentence is too small. Maybe it's something that people reach for, like I said in the beginning. Maybe it's something people reach for because it gives structure to something that feels completely out of control. I don't need the phrase. I need a God who doesn't disappear. And we didn't solve this 2 days ago when we had the first conversation. This one ain't the same, and we still didn't resolve it tonight. We probably weren't going to, and we're probably not going to for quite some time.
Yeah, but I still feel heard. And I really appreciate the fact that this is a safe space for me to talk about my doubts and my fears and not be judged or vilified for having these thoughts. Like, I really appreciate our friendship and the fact that we can talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're having conversations that matter. Um, Silence and slogans don't help anyone who's actually hurting. Um, so as we wrap this up today, if you guys are listening and you've wrestled with that phrase too, uh, or any of the others that people say sometimes when they think they're helping, you're not alone in that. Um, we're gonna keep having these conversations. We'll see you next week.